Lighten up. It was like the clouds come out and everybody goes under a rock. Yes. So this morning we have a little time for question and response, and I always like to say a couple of things about that before we get started. It's really your a kind of generosity of asking a question. Come on in. Okay. That is what keeps this tradition alive. So I believe that's true of all traditions, but within the Zen tradition in particular, questions are what has kept the thing going. Many of our stories of ancestral teachers all are coming from a question that someone asked. Our sutras, in fact, almost all of them start with the Buddha was someplace at some time, and so asked such and such a question, and that's where things come from. So it's we can hear that and say, oh yeah, it makes sense to ask questions, but we might not really value how important a question is. Not the response. The response is important, but ideally the response is there to help encourage our question or help the question grow and deepen and broaden. So that's why we value questions so much. They are what kind of help us, but also require something of us to be stepping along the path. So in this kind of format, the questions are a little bit less formal. Some of you have experienced Shosan we had just several weeks ago, where it's a little more formal situation. The exchange is briefer, not much explanation. This kind of question and response setting is one in which you can ask a question that's a little more conceptual. You can also ask just this kind of question too, but the responses also may be more conceptual. And you can always ask for clarification. You can say, I don't buy it, or you can say, I understand what you're saying, kind of, but I'm not sure about this point. Or could you say more about such and such, or something, referring to something in the content of the response. It's that kind of back and forth which oftentimes reveals something for all of us. And you can just, if you want to ask a question, you just put your hands together and say, Hojo-san.
Hojo-san?
Yes.
During the Buddha's birthday celebration, in the talk beforehand, you said something to the effect of, when we were discussing why we bathe the baby Buddha, don't make yourself small and dirty just so you can clean yourself off. And I've been chewing on that ever since you've said it, and I was hoping that you could say more.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what I was saying in that talk. But one of the things I oftentimes talk about at the time of the Buddha's birth, where we do this ceremony where we are washing a statue of a baby Buddha, I oftentimes quote something from Dogen, the founder of this school in Japan, who was actually echoing his great uncle in the Dharma, Wanshi Zenji, who said, "Forgive us for pouring foul water on your head." So in this talk before they bathe the Buddha, he says to the Buddha, "Forgive us for pouring foul water on your head." And I really love that line. And the reason I love that line is, if the Buddha is the Buddha, there will be no need to wash. And what could be outside of Buddha that you could use to wash the Buddha? There's nothing outside of Buddha. And so to think that we could wash the Buddha means we have to make something outside of the Buddha than to wash the Buddha. And that, by definition, then, whatever we made would be foul. It would be not of the nature of Buddha. It would be something which we had manufactured and split apart. So but we still wash the Buddha. Right? So that's why there's this conundrum in that, which is really important. We have to wash the Buddha. We want to wash the Buddha. Washing the Buddha allows something, but at the same time, if we think we're cleaning the Buddha off, we're kind of making some mistake. Right? And that's also totally true for ourselves. So oftentimes when we're engaging in practice, we think, I'm messed up, I'm going to get some good, clean water, and I'm going to try to wash off the messed upness of me. Now, that's also true. That's also good to have that kind of inspiration to sort of see like, oh, there's something wrong here. There's something off, and I want to do something about it. That's good. But the idea that we could bring something in from outside that would then clean off our small, dirty body has some problems. And one of them is our regard doesn't really shift. We just keep regarding ourselves as this kind of impure, insignificant being. But the Buddha told us that no, we are of the nature of Buddha. That's not what we are. So in that washing, we have to actually change our regard. It's not just about getting the bad stuff off so we can be good, but it's changing the way we regard ourselves and the world that we're trying to do. That's what the real washing is about. And letting go of that part of us that wants to make ourselves small and dirty. Because that actually is a little more convenient than being a Buddha. Being a Buddha is not convenient. Being a bodhisattva is not convenient. It requires a lot of us. So sometimes we want to be small and dirty just because we... Can I just have a latte, please? and this says, well, yeah, you can have a latte, but you have to drink it like a Buddha. What does that mean? You know, that's a kind of different thing. I prefer cappuccino, by the way. Yes.
Can you speak to the meaning of the precious mirror samadhi and the meaning of the mirror in general?
Yeah. So the precious mirror samadhi, that's a text that we recite very often. It's an ancestral writing from one of our Chinese ancestors, and really central to our particular school. And it has a very profound meaning, which is woven in the poetry of that text through a lot of symbolism, and the central symbolism being about the mirror. And so maybe I would just start to say is there is no explanation for the mirror. So anything I will say is just kind of a pointing at the mirror. So don't take what I would say as a kind of like capturing the mirror, because there's no such thing. That's what makes the mirror such a profound symbol, is its ungraspability. And we see that just in our regular, aren't mirrors weird? I mean, if you're any children of the 80s, do you ever light candles in front of mirrors at nighttime saying words over there's a reason for that. And it probably is dangerous. I mean, I used to go and argue with the Eagles Forum Catholic women at the fair about stuff when I was that age, because I was a D&D kid, and they thought we were all going to go to hell. And so I go argue. But they were kind of right about some of the things. And one of those, like those kinds of things, okay, I won't go off too far on it. But there's a real portal in a mirror. Okay? And what I mean by a portal is the ungraspability of being, the ungraspability of consciousness, means that everything flows through right here. And so in the Buddhism in general, or within the Zen school, what we're trying to do is wake up to that in the most profound way. That mirror is the basis of being. Sometimes in Yogacara school, we would say it is the great round wisdom mirror, which is the basis of all that we experience. We could say the foundation of consciousness, that our consciousness is actually, in its fundamental state, this ungraspable. Round means it has no edge. That's what the symbol of round means. A completely edgeless being that is all of what we experience is a reflection in that mirror. So that portal we experience on a moment-to-moment basis, as whatever it is that we're experiencing. And whatever it is that we experience is deeply bound up in the karmic seeds of our being. So what lives in us as an individual, we refer to as karma, or through us as an individual as karma. So everything we're seeing is like a reflection in that mirror, we could say. And so in our practice, facing that mirror means realizing whatever it is that I'm facing, inside or outside of me, is of the essential nature of that luminosity. And so in our practice, that has real ramifications or significance for the way that we practice. So when we're sitting in meditation, we don't just try to clean the mirror by washing the dirt off, like we do the Buddha. We say whatever appears in the mirror is of the nature of luminosity, but my regard for it is probably off. And because my regard for it is off, I'm either clinging to it, or I'm pushing against it, or I'm simply ignoring it. Those are kind of the three flavors of what I do. So with that regard, then a whole world appears, and the world will be marked by the seeds of my own consciousness. That's one of the kind of our understandings of the symbolism of a mirror. So my work is not to try to clean the mirror of all the dust or the problematic experiences, but my job is to work with my regard for what is appearing in the mirror. How do I regard it? Which is not to say that things that are really, really difficult we should become overjoyed about. That's another kind of weird clinging, right? But it's that we're practicing to face them squarely and to change the way we are in relationship to them, because there's no really them. The mirror is not outside of us or inside of us. It's all the mirror, including my sense of self. Anyway, that's just a little sprinkling of the kind of things that start to show up. Yeah.
And can we say that the mirror reflects things, or ourselves reflects things as it, consciousness exactly as it is? Or
Yeah.
That's what we're facing, is the reality, right?
Exactly.
Consciousness.
And the trick in that is that reflecting it exactly as it is means that we will experience the world of karma.
Yeah.
We'll experience a world of all kinds of things, which are provisional. They're real, but they're provisional. So often as when we're reading Buddhist teachings, you might hear them saying all of these things are unreal, or they're empty, or they're transparent. Yeah, that's a way of talking it, but their unrealness or their transparency or their emptiness does not mean that they do not have an actuality. They have an actuality of the experience of them, and that's what we're working with. Yeah.
Can I ask one more thing? So the word that kind of trips me up is samadhi.
Yeah.
That somehow, I mean, it can, at least me, I can think of it if I am holding that correctly, then I'm gonna, have this really good, samadhi experience.
Yeah,
So because, and it feels like the whole sutra speaks to that in a way.
Yeah. So with the samadhi is the word we use for concentration. Meditative concentration is kind of usually what we're referring to. And so when we think about concentration, here's a kind of way that we can regard it. We can regard it on the level, just like the mirror here that's here on the altar. You regard it as something. Like, you could touch that mirror. You can't touch that mirror, but you could touch that mirror. It's very sensitive to the oil on people's hands, so it only gets touched with a special cloth and everything. So don't touch that. So don't touch it. Believe me. Well, believe me enough to believe that's a solid thing up there, as solid as it gets anyway. So you could think about samadhi as that. It's like something that could be experienced. Right? And now it's round to symbolize the edgelessness of the mirror, but this mirror, in fact, if in a material sense, has an edge. So that's one way we could encounter samadhi, concentration. There are kind of marks of concentration. that you learn as you advance in a meditative practice. You can see, or you can experience, when am I entering into a certain kind of concentration, or I'm not entering into that. So that's one level of understanding samadhi. That samadhi we go into and out of. But the reason for going in and out of that samadhi is to learn about a samadhi that's more fundamental. And the more fundamental samadhi is not a samadhi that we can so easily talk about going in and out of. Right? It's not that there isn't anything cultivated there. There is. There's a purposeful cultivation of concentration, but it's more in the realm of this morning what I've been calling regard. We're working with what is the way that I regard things. And in that, a different kind of concentration opens up, which is much less of an edge of this one, like I'm in it or I'm not in the concentration. And then there's the samadhi which never comes or goes or changes at all. We could say the most real samadhi is that samadhi. And that samadhi is the mirror that has no edge, and there's nothing outside of. That's that samadhi that we could have some experience of can only appear because of that samadhi. And the one in the middle, I say. So in our practice, especially if we're newer to a meditation practice or whatever, just work on that first one. Try to figure out something about your mind, because it's probably very chaotic, right? And not in a great way. Sometimes chaos is a little nice, yeah. But so that's a level to work with it, and that is kind of, clean it, yeah, and try to see, like, what is all these things that I just ruminate over and over and over again. How could I stop doing that? How could I enter into a different kind of concentration? But as you do that, don't hold on to the brightness of mind that appears, because if you hold on to the brightness of mind that appears, you're kind of reifying this brightness, which is a very difficult thing to wash away, right? Much more difficult than the dirt. So then there's this. So that what you want to do is you want to work on this next level, which is there, and then work on the next level. And the way to do that is to work with a teacher. Uh-huh.
I've been hearing a lot of talk in my life and in the Sangha about practicing in a world on fire. And so this summer season, my vow is to practice closely with the Buddha's fire sermon, where he talks about everything is on fire.
Yeah.
So recently, I started working in the literal marketplace, which is not what I would describe as a tranquil environment. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how to practice with sensory experience on fire, how to hold that as a bodhisattva.
Yeah.
What do we do? How can we regard these things?
Yeah.
Seemingly untranquil things.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like you should practice like the lettuce. You bring a beautiful lettuce to market, and the lettuce, because it's not moving around in a way that we can see so easily. It is moving around, but we don't see it so easily. So we think of it as an object. We think of it as kind of a still thing. But the lettuce is going to do all kind of things during the day, and as the keeper of the lettuce, you have to be aware of that, right? Like if you just put the lettuce out in where the sun's hitting it very directly, then you're going to have a problem, right? So you give a little shade to the lettuce, but also you realize the lettuce is going to get a little beat up in the process. Someone who's not so what would be the word, conscientious about lettuce buying will come and squeeze all the lettuce while they're trying to find the best one and break 5 to buy the one that they want. So there's all these kind of things that are happening that you're paying attention to. That part's really important. We really should pay attention. Like, how do you care for the lettuce in that overall situation? Shouldn't just be your sacrifice, but should also be your regard for how do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of the customer? How do you care of the area that you're in? All of those are things to regard. And the market becomes much better when people do that. I think our market's pretty good in that regard. A lot of very conscientious people have spent decades crafting what the market is. That's my wife's religion, by the way. It's Saturday market. Anyone's thinking of starting a church there, I'm sure she'll join straight away. She gets so, when she's there, it's just like, to her, it's like the best. And just, it's a way for her to touch and be touched that's really profound. Anyway, so that level is important, and so I encourage you, giving, when I say lettuce practice, that's one side of it. Lettuce is delicate, and it should be cared for, and that should go in all directions, not just you caring, but also the other direction. My guess is, although I've never worked at the market, there's probably a culture of sacrifice for the lettuce. I don't know, but just pay attention to that. You can be lettuce too. Yeah. And then the second thing I would say is also notice the lettuce just goes with it. Lettuce is like, there's the squeezing lettuce. And that's what the lettuce does. And the lettuce bruises a bit, and has some problem. That's not such a big problem. But I think oftentimes we're so pushed against that our own idea of how it has to be from the other side, from the caring side. We've taken this work of caring for it, I'm going to be lettuce, and that person comes up and squeezes it. You're like, what are you doing? Which is not a bad reaction, but we cut ourselves off then to have the reaction, rather than like, hey, don't squeeze all the lettuce, please. We're all caring for each other here. Right? So, but we kind of divide, and then all of those beings that are coming, they're all potential lettuce breakers. They're all potential lettuce squeezers. That tension builds in the way we're regarding everybody that's there. Yeah, and people, my experience is that people are largely inconsiderate. I don't know if you're experiencing that at the market or not. Some people very considerate. Some people so considerate they don't realize they're being inconsiderate. Like the person at the front of the line is being so considerate, and there's 15 people behind him. That's like kind of Eugene's situation. Yeah. So if we make a wall there where people's being considerate in the way that we would want them to be considerate is how it is that we can interact with them, then we're just in like this. But what the fire teaches us is it's all on fire. Lettuce on fire, you're on fire, they're on fire, it's all on fire. And because it's all on fire, all of those hard edges are not exactly the point. And that's a place where we can practice. But you have to care for yourself in that process, or else you can just become overwhelmed. And then beyond your own intention, you'll recoil and harden up.
Thank you. Ojo-san?
Mm-hmm.
You told a story one time about a wise man who was coming, another wise man was coming to visit him.
Mm-hmm.
And in front of the entryway, there was a round bowl of perfectly clear, still water. Yeah. And the visiting sage came and put a needle in that water. Yeah. Could you tell that story again, or at least, it was so long ago, I don't remember.
Yeah. So this is a story about two of our ancestors, Nagarjuna and Kanedeva. Mm-hmm. Kanedeva became the Dharma heir to Nagarjuna, and it's said that on their meeting, Nagarjuna knew that Kanedeva was approaching, and in the record of the ancestral records of this, just to give people context, within the Zen school, there's a body of literature that is the records of the meeting of ancestors, and there's usually some kind of interaction between them, oftentimes a question and response. And those records are referred to as the records of the light. And there's a vast body of these, and different lineages, different teachers will pull together collections of these, or some of them have been very important to them, and then they will arrange them for their students to study in some way. So the Shobo Genzo, which is the text that Dogen Zenji wrote that many people study in this school, it's just chocked full of those stories. So that'd be an example of if you were studying in Dogen's tradition, you probably would be reading that text, the Shobo Genzo, at least sometimes, and you would come across all of these different stories. So one of the ways the stories get put together is through a particular lineage. So a lineage means that there's the lineage is passed from a teacher to a student down through time, and those lineage holders become the teachers that are in each generation that are teaching each new generation. They're empowered by the generation before. So in that lineage, then people will study the interactions from these light transcripts that go back through time. So Nagarjuna and Kanadeva are two that are in our lineage, are in all Zen lineages, and so that interaction gets studied a lot. So in the light record, if you read very carefully, he says, as Kanadeva was going to approach the gate, he had this bowl of water placed in front of the seat, the teaching seat. So if that was here, it would be Kanadeva's coming to this gateway, and I say, Joichi, bring a bowl of water and fill it all the way up to the top and place it here. So that water would get placed here. And this is an interesting point, one that I wasn't clear on until earlier this week, because I thought it was placed at the gate, and I was discussing it with another teacher, and he was saying, I don't think it's at the gate, I think it's in front of the seat. So I went back and looked at there's different translations that do it different ways, but in the Chinese it says, which is the original text is in the Chinese, it's before the seat. But I actually like that better because it is still the gateway, right? He's approaching the gate, and we think that's the mountain gate. That's what it says in the text. He's approaching the mountain gate. And so now Nagarjuna reveals another gate. He says, okay, are we going to meet at the gateway? It would be improper for me to go out there and meet you at that gateway. I'm here in the seat of the teacher. I will have this bowl here, which is another kind of gateway. And it's a very mysterious gateway, and I would say tricky gateway. Just like that baby Buddha or the mirror, this is a bowl that's completely filled to the brim. I always imagine it as being round. I think that's natural, most bowls are round. Not all, but most. So there's this round bowl with water all the way to the top. And I imagine that for Nagarjuna, that's just a kind of test of Kanadeva. He's like, we could say a test, or we could say Nagarjuna's just giving Kanadeva his whole heart and mind. He's saying it's completely full and round, ungraspable, complete, clear, all the way through. Why are you showing up? What could be said? And Kanadeva removes this needle, and imagine him kind of not laying it on top like to make a compass, but it penetrates the water. This very thin, sharp mind. So this is just how it is. Even if we come to understand that the world is just as it is, as long as that is a perspective, then we can't really function. So Kanadeva is greeted by Nagarjuna and very quickly becomes his successor because he knows this. That in this place where nothing could be added, nothing could be taken away, Kanadeva dares this needle, this one unitary thing. So that story gets celebrated in many ways. In some ways it gets celebrated as being the way in which a teacher and a student match perfectly, very instantaneously. Like they don't have to do anything, they match perfectly. Which is not better, by the way. People usually think, oh, that's the really great one. But actually, being down in the mud for a long time is also good. So sometimes it's like this, sometimes down in the mud for a long time. So sometimes it gets celebrated that way. But usually when I'm teaching from that story, I'm trying to teach more about what does it mean to, or what is the practice of deeply caring for what every one of us is completely endowed with, which is this completely transparent, round, ungraspable heart. And that's really what our practice is. Sometimes even you can think about, especially if you're new to meditation, it can be really helpful to think like you're holding this big bowl of water. And you're kind of moving around with your body, with your mind, while the water's moving around. No problem really. But also we want to know the water as the stillness of the water.
And then the interaction of meeting, encountering someone who wants to teach you, let us, something in the world as just as clean and perfect, or perfect, I don't know, as a needle dropping into a bowl of water. I don't know, the image is just so stunning.
Yeah, it really is. And that's enough. Our job isn't to figure out the image or be able to explain it. It's that the image becomes compelling and tells us something about this needle tossing that is what our lineage is about. Jacqueline taught us many years ago because he's a weaver and a kind of what do you call that, scholar of these types of things, weaving and sewing, that at that time in that place, almost for sure, the needle would have been the bone of a bird. So this gives another nuance to the story. If you think about how birds are flying through the full, clear bowl of the sky constantly, that the path of birds is something which in our lineage is referred to a lot as a way to study what the way of the walking the Buddha way is about, is like the path of birds. So it's traceless, and yet there is something that we have to do, that kind of image. So I oftentimes then think about that. Always thought of it as a metal one, because that's what I'm familiar with, but that probably that was a very thin, sharp bone, really a bird flying through the sky.
What you're saying? In the story, doesn't the needle float on the water?
No. I probably said that though.
It would make more sense if it's a bone.
That it would float. Yeah. I think I've said it many ways, and a lot of them wrong, or most of them wrong, probably. But I would say this is actually the great power of these lineage stories, is that they do give us an image. This one is quite a striking image. Sometimes it's really more like words, like certain chunks of words. But they give us this, and then our job is not to figure them out. It's to let them live in and through us. And so for the image to change around a little bit, for it to be floating, to be this or that, is really good. But then we can go back to the text and we can clarify, did it say that or did it not say that? If it doesn't say it, it doesn't necessarily mean it didn't happen or it did happen. That's not the point. It just moves us along in our own study. And so that's how I prefer to work with it. And as I can tell, in the traditions that use a koan curriculum, where you meet with a teacher, they give you a koan to work on, you meet with the teacher and you give a response to that's very alive in that process. But the teacher probably will pull you back to the text when you're going off a little bit too far. So I tried to do that for myself, but not always successful.
So a lot of the time I think in talks
there's a lot of talk about like opening your
Mhm.
hand up
Yeah.
to thought.
Mhm.
And there's also kind of the idea of beginner's mind.
Mhm.
I find it almost might have the opposite problem
Mhm.
of, in my line of work, which is teaching, I'm
Mhm.
often told you have to be very sturdy
Mhm.
and have all these answers of this is the right way to do it in
Mhm.
the classroom.
Mhm.
And we're going to be very consistent about it.
Mhm.
And I have trouble finding like sturdy beliefs within myself.
Mhm.
I often think, why should we do it this way every time when this other way could be just as good?
Mhm.
And I'm finding that in a lot of different places in life. So how can you become more sturdy?
Yeah, yeah. So the point of the opening is not to get past or to destroy the particularity. And that's really easy to get confused. Especially, I would say, the way we think about opening in kind of our cultural situation right now is almost always this idea of opening means it will drop away or we'll kind of get past it in some way. So, so we've practiced that for a while, and you're very attuned to be able to pick up this fine point. People make that mistake for a long time in meditation, thinking that meditation is about just kind of getting over all the, it couldn't be that important, right? All this stuff. And so, but that's not what it's about. If you thought about the opening as being more like an opening and like I'm getting this image of a flower when it's buddy, it kind of does this, and then as it opens, it does this. That happens as our grasp on something is loosened, or we're allowing the tightness to unfold, that we can also feel for the gravity of the situation. So for example, if you're meeting a student and you're saying to the student, do it like this because this is the way we do it, because this is the way I'm saying to do it, because this is the way I was told that we're going to do it, and so you need to do it that way. The chance that student's going to do it the way you want them to do it, and even if they do it the way you want them to do it, to have the heart that you want them to have while they're doing it, and for it to become meaningful to them in the way that you want it to become meaningful to them, because you're not telling them to do it that way for no reason. It might be just very practical, but it probably has to do with cooperation with other people. It might have to do with cooperation with themselves. It might have to do with their process of learning. So you want to be able to say it to them in a way that the authority is not about that kind of rigidity. I was told to do it this way, so I'm telling you to do it that way, and you better do it that way because I was told to do it that way. And if you don't do it that way, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for me. That person told me to do it this way. It's just all power all the way through. But you have this other option, and it's so. As a teacher, things get a little crazy. I was a teacher for a long time, so I know this, that things get a little crazy. So sometimes you just snap the grid. You're like, do it this way because I said so. Shut up. That's not uncommon. But the best moment is when you can look at a student and say, oh, do it this way. And they know that you mean it. They know you mean it as something that is important and ultimately good for them and for you. That's kind of the sweet spot. So in meditation, the same thing. What we want to do is not just try to get past the feelings or ideas or thoughts or those other things that we're having, but we want to know more deeply what they're centered in. We want to know more deeply what is the gravity or the ground that they connect with. And that's when I'm talking about working with our regard. That's what I'm talking about. Oftentimes, like in this case, we're like, well, it should be done this way. So my regard is, it should be done this way because that's the way it's supposed to be done. Or someone told me it's supposed to be that way. And I actually think there's a bunch of ways it could be done. But I'm just going to hold on to that because that's what I'm supposed to do. Again, relatively blameless, but everything gets stuck there. And that's happening on all kinds of different levels, just very immediately in our consciousness. That kind of process is happening all the time. So in meditation, we're studying that. How do I feel more centered and more deeply, whatever that thought is about? That's what the opening up is about, not like it opens up and then goes away. And then usually, if we can do that, it does have its own way of resolving, so to speak, especially the things that we're kind of ruminating on.
Yeah. But to have the student feel like this, like I really mean it. Like for me to really mean it, I have to really mean it.
Yeah.
How do I find what I really mean?
So that's exactly the same thing. That place where the whatever it is that you're thinking about, you're regarding, you have to find your way down to the ground with it. So if we take a classroom example as the example again, I know you're in a Waldorf tradition, right? So that you got to kind of bear some of the karma of following a German philosopher. So I mean, if he had been Jamaican or something, I don't know, that was a different. That's going to have a particular flavor to it, right? So there's a lot of things that are like this. So I would say in that realm, you have to find what's true in that. You're going to teach in that system. You have to come to know what's true in it. And that has to become true for you. It doesn't mean that you have to be, a clone of Steiner, right? But it means that through the way that educational approach was developed, you have to find your own place in it. And your own place in it is not going to be about what's right and wrong from a kind of like theoretical perspective. It's going to be about what you engage in the classroom with students right there. That exact same process is happening inside yourself in the practice of meditation or Buddhist teachings, those kinds of things, is that you can't believe them or just to try to copy what's happening. You have to put them into practice, and as you're putting them into practice, you see the relevance of them, you see how it happens. I think one of the things that can be tricky is when you're in a system, there'll be a lot of things that are off the field, right? So you come here, we don't say like, why don't we just all roll around in the grass for the meditation period? That could be good. Some people might have a lot of like insight in that they're not going to be sitting in here the same old thing all the time, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so we could do that, but mostly we don't, right? Or we say, people can do that, but they should do it on their own time. Or we're not going to make everybody do that, whatever it is. So when you're in the system, sometimes there's all this stuff that kind of gets cut off that you might want to explore. And that's part of the cost of a system. And what someone had asked me in Shosan a few weeks back, which I almost never bring up Shosan things, I usually don't remember them, but something about Soto Zen not being able to kind of hold their wild spirit. And I was like, well, how many hours of the day are you practicing Soto Zen? I mean, you'd be wild other times, right? You don't have to be wild all the time. So, I mean, it wasn't a completely fair answer, and we'll see if she comes back with more discussion of that. But that point being that inside the system, this was very hard for me to learn. Just to put your mind in that system so that you receive something from your ancestors. And in receiving something from your ancestors the ancestors in this tradition of teaching, then it becomes yours. And as it becomes yours, then you're able, what it means for it to become yours is it becomes your own authority. Yeah, not their authority. And that process takes a time and a kind of fidelity to that process that will bring you somewhere. And then there's all kinds of like Waldorf inspired, or used to be Waldorf, but I'm not anymore, or whatever. There's all kinds of ways that people would go with that. But particularly as you're training to sink in there, it's important.
Mm-hmm. I realize that my meditation practice is something that I'm really attached to as being useful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very good at doing it when things are wrong because it makes me feel better.
Yeah.
I'm really
You came to the right school.
And I'm really horrible at doing it when things are good because, well, then I don't feel like I need it.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about some of the beginner's mind, or like, how do I get out of the feeling of maintenance? Like, I'm sweeping the floor again, I feel like I can't, not that it always has to be joyful, but that I do need something to motivate or enthusiasm when things aren't horrible. Yeah.
Well, so one of our kind of modern ancestors who was quite influential in the revitalization of Soto Zen in Japan in the 20th century. He was really famous for saying, Zazen is good for nothing. It's good for nothing, it's good for nothing. And that became a mantra in some of the lineages where they're just really like, no gaining mind, no usefulness. It's all about doing something that's not useful, completely break with this idea that it will be useful. And I appreciate that. It also just seems a little bit musty, you know? Like, it's a good medicine for a certain kind of mind. But I think that we actually do have a mind that's involved in usefulness or not usefulness, and that's what you want to work with. So the fact that you're seeing into this is really important. You're seeing that, yeah, I'm willing to bring myself to this kind of practice if I think I need something to happen. If I think the baby Buddha needs a good scrub, then I'm going to do it, right? But if not, then if I'm not thinking anything needs scrub, then why do it? Not thinking the floor needs swept, then why do it? So coming across that itself is really important to understand what's the grounding here? What's the deeper thing that I'm, or the underlying, maybe would be a better, what's the underlying dynamic that's present there? We probably don't want to pay attention to things just because they need fixed. We want to pay attention to things out of love, out of care, out of a deep regard for our shared being. So it's not so bad that we try to fix things up with Zazen, but then when we realize, like, if that's all I'm doing is fixing things up, how am I doing this other regard? And you might find that it's right there in your life, that you are doing that. And I'm sure you are in many places. So then the question becomes, oh, Zazen, how could Zazen be about that too? Not just kind of forcing myself to do it because I think I'm supposed to, but seeing that on the side where the supposed to kind of functions because things are rough and I need the medicine, I'm taking it, that's good, do it. But then on the parts where I don't, not as a problem or not as a way to fix yourself, but as just a deeper look into how am I paying attention to things and taking care of them. And I'd say for most of us in the kind of busy modern world, that very simple thing, which we could call attention, is just being fragmented at an unprecedented rate. So it's no mistake that you need the kind of like, look over here to do this, because that's what our whole life is made up of now, almost, is look over here, look over here, look over here. So it's a kind of quite radical resistance to the whole thing, to say like, oh, I'm going to pay attention just because. So, yeah, maybe we'll all get leather jackets. We like, sorry. Okay, we have time for one more, if there's anything else hanging out there.
Hojo-san.
Yeah.
Would you speak about sleep? I've never... Sometimes when people ask, like, what did you do with them as a monk, you know, in Japan? I was like, well, I studied sleep deprivation. And so much comes up in that. And it's just, you know, this past week was the only first week in a long time I've been here every morning. And even just second period. And I was tired and grumpy. And realizing there's this certain necessity and beauty in sleep and it's a part of our lives. And it seems to be a storehouse of karma in a certain way. And I've just never really thought about it as that. And yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts about what is it?
Yeah.
It's a wild, mysterious thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. So, I don't know what it is, but I could say that about most things, and that it is ungraspable. And its ungraspability is a place where our struggle with it in practice, I think, is really important, because we have so much karma around it, and that's true of everybody. That our karma is quite strong, and then how do we actually work with that karma? Just like every place else in practice, is the same thing is right there. So I'm oftentimes puzzled by people's assertion of like sleep deprivation in practice, but I realize I'm like a pro sleeper. I'm like super. I'm that guy that's like I might start snoring before my head hits the pillow. It's like I just kind of can turn off and then turn on, and I have restful sleep. So I get that's one of the dynamics. But what I oftentimes see is people that have a pattern in their life that is really stubborn, and they won't change the pattern in their life. So, like for example, I get up about 4:15, 4:30 every morning, not Saturdays or Sundays. Sunday's a little bit later. Saturday as late as I want. But I go to bed at 9. And I built a life around that. So is 7.5 hours sleep deprivation or not sleep deprivation? What happens before 9 o'clock? Like, what am I doing with my life to get to the place where I would be able to go to sleep? What's that all look like, etc.? That oftentimes the karma that people are running into is that they have a way of living and they're not really shifting their way of living. They're just trying to do something like get up early in the morning and come practice. So I think that's one thing that's there. And that's not just about doing a practice that's like early morning practice, really anything that we try to do where we're inserting something and it takes our attention, the discipline to put us there. Oftentimes we're not changing the rest of our life. We're just trying to do that thing. And then how long can you keep that up? Actually, the whole life has to be arranged to be able to do that thing. That's one of the reasons that parents are so tired the first couple years. I mean, because the babies wake you up at night, but also because you don't know how to live your life with children being the center of it. So you're just constantly, you haven't done all the other things you need to do to be able to do it. So that's one thing. I think that the way that it pushes into our idea of what rest is interesting. What do we find rest? Do we find our capacity to rest outside of sleep? I think for a lot of us we don't. It's like this is where I can get the rest, and then everything else is go, 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 go. And on just the level of kind of our energetics of our body, I think that's true. But I think even more true in our psyche. So more true in our mind. That I'm awake, right? So being awake, it's like experience, 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 and the light becomes so dominant. It's about all of this being, seeing, reacting, doing all that kind of thing. We need the opposite. And so in the opposite, it's not that there are no experiences in sleep, but they're not driven by the kind of insatiable appetite for light that we have in our waking life, especially when we're pushing for things all the time. And so a different kind of response can emerge in our dreams that is different than that kind of that other kind of response. And so what is the way that we're pushing in our day-to-day life? And sometimes that looks like just the kind of overactive life, modern life with, like I was saying, our attention being pulled in 50 different directions at once constantly. So that's part of it, but there's something more, there's something deeper in that. There's this kind of driving of self-clinging, which is trying to affirm itself in everything that it's meeting, in the way that it's arranging a day all the time. And that's what the practice is trying to teach us to be a different way, to live a different way, to think a different way, in which that is not what's driving it. When that happens, a relationship with sleep may really change, or the certain need for sleep, etc., may change. And that's where the part where, like when you were in monastic training, if you're having, like maybe 6 hours a night or something, which for most people isn't quite enough, it'll push on that a little bit. Yeah, we'll push on that a little bit. But it's not like the really serious sleep deprivation that will happen if you go into some schools or traditions where really only sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night. But those traditions use that it's on purpose. They're not just trying to be mean. They're trying to get you to a place. Well, some of them maybe are trying to just. They're trying to get you to a place where you're going to regard things in a different way in your so-called waking life. That's there. I would say, on the whole, I think we have a really we have our regard for sleep is very poor, and that kind of waking up. Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night and everything's dark? Isn't that great? And you kind of like that, you know what I'm saying? That point, you know, you're kind of like, just, it's kind of still, even if it's noisy, you know, it can be some noise or something around. There's this sort of there's something, like, you know, both about the total rest and the urgency of life in the same. It's all kind of like right there at the same time. So I was listening to a woman who studies ancient sleep patterns, and she was saying that it was very common in Western civilizations, European civilization, that people would get up, they would wake up in the middle of the night, midnight, 1 o'clock or something like that, and you would just stay up for a while, and then you would go back to sleep. And that was seen as a really important part of a healthy thing about how you would live as a person. So I think there's something about that as well. Sitting meditation early in the morning. Are we bringing that to it, or are we just kind of like grinding through the thing that we're supposed to do? To me, that's where the practice dynamic is alive.
I'm getting real. It's very helpful to feel the yo-yo, like especially if the world feels really engaging and I'm really caught, and then it's like go to sleep and it's like I go into a black hole, and then I can get yoinked back into life, and it's like a lot on the system versus the times where I have more careful's around that, and there's an ease and a flow and a more of a permeability of otherworldliness and this worldliness. They're not at odds with each other in a certain way.
And ultimately what we want to be able to do is just turn. There's dark, there's light, and they're not split at all. And in their not splitness at all, that our capacity is to just move freely there. So that's what we study in the caring. That's what we study in the caring for it. So sometimes the caring is setting things up in such a way that we have the proper transitions and all that kind of thing. And that can be very helpful and important. And then the other part of the study is just like, get off it. Just get off it. What are you holding on to?